Hello, welcome to BIL 102 New Testament Survey. This is Dr. Barb Bruler. This is the second installment in a series of 4 lectures on the culture of the Hellenistic Roman world. In this particular lecture, we'll be digging in a little bit deeper into the system of patrons and clients, a system which set up the basic economic structure of the ancient Roman world. Let's begin with some cultural connections. First thing I'd like you to do is take out a piece of paper and a pencil. You can pause the video for just a moment at this point if you need to. All right, now that you've got that paper and pencil, I want you to draw a diagram, not necessarily a pie chart, that depicts 4 to 6 of the basic social classes in American society. I've given you an example below how to draw a basic diagram and some of the social classes that you might be working with. So pause the video here and take a few minutes and draw a diagram. Be creative, use some colors and some different breakdowns if you'd like to. We'll see you in just a moment. All right, now that you've got that diagram drawn, I want you to mark yourself on the diagram with an asterisk. Try to show where you think you belong in this breakdown of American social classes that you've just drawn. Keeping that there in front of you, we're going to move on now to take a look at a diagram of the Roman social classes. This can be broken down into 2 large categories, the elites and the rest. You'll notice that this diagram is presented to you as a pyramid. The elites in the very top of the pyramid and the rest taking up the large swath at the bottom. Roman social classes had a few small elite groups that formed the very top of the social pyramid. The Senate and the senatorial families, really just a very small group, the equestrian classes in Rome. The decurion class would have been regional or provincial magistrates and leaders in those areas, and then a vague category known as the respectable populace. This would have been teachers, philosophers, skilled artisans, and others in leadership, but not in the decurion class. You'll notice that this only accounts for approximately 6 to 7% of population in the Roman world. The other, approximately 90%, was made up the large swath at the bottom of the pyramid, which here is categorized as the free poor, people such as tenant farmers, day laborers, or dependents, as well as the destitute, orphans, widows, the ill, the handicapped, the impoverished. So you'll see that this large bottom part of the pyramid really depends on the top for all of its resources and influence. Let's break this down a little bit further. This culture of patrons and clients in the Hellenistic world meant that the majority of people depended on the wealth of the few for their livelihood. Just to clarify for a moment, take a look at the diagram on the right. You'll notice that it's similar to that diagram of the Roman social classes, but here it's built on American social classes. You might recognize the pyramid shape, but in the American social classes case, the bottom legs of the pyramid are cut off. And there's a very small underclass, whereas the large majority of the middle of the pyramid is taken up by the middle class and the working class. Significantly different from what the Roman social class pyramid looked like. And I imagine that most of you fall into the middle class, perhaps the college-educated middle class if you're taking this course. As we think about that in contrast to the pyramid of the Roman social classes, we can see that that Roman pyramid led to a hierarchical system of patrons, the elite, and that very small part of the top of the pyramid, and their clients, their dependents on the bottom half. The system was hierarchical because the elite very clearly were superior to their dependents, and also because it had a chain of relationships built into it, where one patron might be a client to many people, but also have a patron above him as well. You'll see a little bit of a caricature over here on the right of a patron doling out money to his clients, and this was a system that was caricatured in the ancient world. But if we wanted to define it a little bit more nicely, we would say that patrons generally gave favors, gifts, from which we get our word grace, and employment to their clients. It was honorable for a patron to give respect and employment and gifts, both financial and otherwise, to their clients, one of the ways that they gained honor and praise in the ancient world. Clients, on the other hand, owed gratitude, support, and praise for their patrons. Now, you might notice that this is the opposite of our relational economic system, where we typically think of employers owing a debt of obligation to employees to pay them their wages and benefits. In the ancient world, it worked the opposite direction, where clients were really obligated to their patrons. And patrons did depend on their clients for social support, but it was the clients who were much more in the dependent position. Let's take a moment to consider an example from 2 Corinthians 11, 7 through 11. I'll give you a moment if you want to pause the video here and turn to that passage, and I'll read it for us in a minute. So here we have 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 7 through 11. Paul here is writing to the Corinthian church, trying to defend himself from some other leaders that have risen in the church community. This is what Paul says. Did I commit a sin by humbling myself so that you might be exalted because I proclaimed God's good news to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. And when I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for my needs were supplied by the friends who came from Macedonia. So I refrained and will continue to refrain from burdening you in this way. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boast of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. In this short passage, we see Paul wrestling with the patron-client system, both in terms of his relationship with the church at Corinth and also his financial obligations between him and them. Let's look at a few issues here. First, note that Paul didn't accept money from the Corinthians. Others appear to have. This means, did Paul refuse the Corinthians' patronage? Was this a slap in their face to say that they were not due the honor to have Paul as their client? Did Paul simply reject their offers, or did he never offer at all? The next complicating factor is that Paul took money from others. So the Corinthian church had to ask themselves, was Paul beholden to them instead? Was Paul actually a servant of the church in Macedonia, probably the Philippian church that was supporting him, and the Corinthians were just a tool for him? Were they considered more honorable than the Corinthians were? Accepting money from somewhere else made Paul's relationship that much more complicated. Finally, Paul puts himself in the position of the patron because Paul gave them the gospel. So the Corinthians have to ask themselves, was Paul really the patron here, trying to cast the Corinthians as his clients? This relationship of hierarchy, wealth, social connections made the patron-client system in Paul's relationships with Corinth very important, but also very, very delicate and very complicated. Here we see a more typical presentation of a Roman patron here. So to sum up, the patron and client system was a system of reciprocity, a way of transferring social and economic capital. It was primarily a way of transferring honor. A patron gained honor by having clients who supported him, but the clients also gained honor from their patron as their patron gave them employment and influence in the community. This was a system of economic, social, and familial loyalty that allowed little change. Therefore, it was quite traditional. We would see families of patrons and families of clients in that same relationship across generations. It was a system that bonded together economics, money and finances with social relationships and also families in a very tight system. An example for you to discuss later on for the class is taken from 2 Peter chapter 1 verses 3 through 11. A few things for you to think about here. First, how is God cast as the ultimate patron in this passage? What is it that God gives? And who are God's clients? And how are they expected to behave in response to God for his patronage? I hope you enjoyed this lecture and that you enjoy the further discussion on 2 Peter. Thank you very much.